So today on a show, just at the beginning of this week, Robin Williams passed away. And it was a shock to the world, not just to the nation, but to the world. It was an apparent suicide. And as you know, he was an Oscar winner. He was only 63 years old. So young. And, he was a comic genius, an icon. And so, as we know, Robin suffered for decades from substance abuse and alcoholism, clinical depression, and bipolar.
And today in-house, we're going to have Professor J.P. Singh, who is a Washington, D.C.-based expert on both suicide and mental illness. He's the CEO of the Global Institute of Forensic Research, and he's received his Ph.D. in psychiatry from the University of Oxford and served as a senior clinical researcher for the Swiss Department of Justice in Zurich.
And Dr. Singh is also an internationally recognized and award-winning researcher. He's an author, he's a lecturer, and he has extensive knowledge, and he's an expert in severe mental illnesses. But like millions, like he said, he's also a fan of Robin Williams.
And speaking of him being a fan, we have a quote from Dr. J here that says, Robin Williams was an inspiration in his portrayal of mental health care professionals. From Good Will Hunting to Awakenings, he managed to capture the compassion and empathy that we all hope to share with our patients. And Tony has a clip for you.
All right, enjoy it. So we'll be back with Dr. Singh.
Right up your ass, it'd probably be healthier for you.
Yeah, I know. It really gets in the way of my yoga.
You work out, huh?
What, you lift?
Yeah.
Yeah, Nautilus?
No, free weights.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Free weights, huh?
Yeah, big time.
Yeah?
Just like that.
What do you bench?
285. What do you bench?
You paint that?
Yeah. You paint?
Mm-mm.
Do you sculpt?
No.
You like art? You like music?
It's a real piece of shit.
Oh, well, tell me what you really think.
Just the linear and impressionistic mix makes a very muddled composition. It's also a Winslow Homer ripoff, except you got Whitey rowing the boat there.
Oh, it's art one, eh? It wasn't very good.
That's not really what concerns me, though.
What concerns you?
Just the coloring.
You know what the real bitch of it is? It's paint by number.
Is it color by number? Because the colors are fascinating to me.
Are they really? What about that?
I think you're about one step away from cutting your fucking ear off.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Think I should move to the south of France, change my name to Vincent?
You ever heard the saying, any port in the... Yeah, maybe that means you.
In what way?
Maybe you're in the middle of a storm, a big fucking storm.
Yeah.
The sky's falling on your head, the waves are crashing over your little boat, the oars are about to snap. You're just pissing your pants, you're crying for the harbor, so maybe you do what you gotta do to get out. Maybe you became a psychologist.
Bingo. That's it. Let me do my job now. You start with me. Come on.
Maybe you married the wrong woman.
Maybe you should watch your mouth. Watch it right there, Chief, all right?
Well, that's it, isn't it? You married the wrong woman. What happened? Why'd she leave you? Was she, banging some other guy?
If you ever disrespect my wife again, I will end you. I will fucking end you. Got that, Chief?
Time's up.
The summer was extraordinary. It was a season of rebirth and innocence, a miracle. 15 patients, and for us, the caretakers. But now we have to adjust to the realities of miracles. We can hide behind the veil of science and say it was the drug that failed, or that the illness itself had returned, or that the patients were unable to cope with losing decades of their lives. But the reality is, we don't know what went wrong any more than we know what went right. What we do know is as the chemical window closed, another awakening took place. That the human spirit is more powerful than any drug. And that is what needs to be nourished. Because work, play, friendship, family. These are the things that matter. This is what we'd forgotten. The simplest things.
All right, we're back. We're back. This is Tony Sweet and Eddie Connor on our Tony Sweet.
Happy High Frequency Friday.
Yeah, that's right. So those are the clips that definitely that you probably recognize if you've seen the movie Good Will Hunting and, of course, Awakening.
And if you're from the South, you redneckinize them.
You redneckinize them. And we're going to talk here in just a second. We're trying to get him on the line here. We have Dr. Jay Singh going to be calling in. He's from Washington, D.C., and he is going to be helping us understand a little bit more about Robin Williams and just celebrity and mental illness and the bipolar and addictions. And so we're gonna have him on in just a second. And so many people suffer from this. This is not just Robin Williams. This is millions of people that suffer this on a daily basis. And, something that I found very fascinating, and it was something for the first time that I noticed on social media, usually when somebody passes away or suicide or whatever the reason, that people say, rest in peace and, God bless him. But so many people, it's like, I know what he's feeling. I'm going through the same thing. I've suffered for years. And, for you as a psychic and for me as an empath, it's really sad to see the world, the earth, and the human beings that are suffering from this on a daily basis.
I think more now than ever before. I think the stress level, particularly in the United States, not that it's not high everywhere else. I'm strictly speaking from my experience here and what I see and hear on a regular, ongoing basis. The stress level just to survive in the United States right now is higher than ever. And there's also lots of other, I feel and believe, and we'll ask Dr. Singh about this, outside influences that
I think we may have him. Dr. Singh, are you there?
Yes, I am.
There he is.
Yay.
Dr. Singh's on the line. Yay. We finally got through to you.
I've always dreamt of having an applause entering a room, so thank you for helping me with that.
Well, we have these thousands of people sitting in here with us, just waiting to hear from you. Yeah. So,
amazing. Love it.
okay, so we played some clips from Good Will Hunting and Awakenings and some roles that he really brought psychiatry and what we feel how psychiatry really needs to grasp a hold of people that are going through their issues, problems, from addictions to, bipolar. And I'm glad you're on the line because the world right now is we're suffering through his loss of life, and we want to know what's going on, what's going on with celebrities and people that are suffering from these issues.
Absolutely. Now more than ever, depression is certainly an epidemic problem. In the United States, it's estimated that approximately between 1 in 6 to 1 in 10 Americans is going to be diagnosed with clinical depression at some point in their lives. So really more now than ever, it's important to have these serious conversations. And if there's something positive that can be taken out of this tragic situation, my sincere hope is that it allows us to have these difficult discussions to be able to shed light on what is a serious, although common problem.
Do you feel like right now, Dr. Singh, that for some, why are the numbers climbing more now than, let's say, 20 years ago? Why do you feel like there are more people, 1 in 6 or 1 in 10 Americans, going to be diagnosed more now than they have been in the past? What shifted?
Sure.
What changed?
So some of it has to do with the actual evolution of our understanding, as well as our definition as mental health professionals of what exactly constitutes clinical depression. To give you a good example of this, just last year, a new book was published. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM. This is the 5th edition of this. It's one of these big books that allows mental health professionals here in the States to diagnose mental illnesses. And one of the most substantial, albeit most controversial changes in terms of our definition of what constitutes depression is that before, in the previous versions, our understanding of clinical depression did not allow for individuals who are going through a period of bereavement. So let's say that you have a loved one die, for instance. The grieving period afterwards, many times it really resembles the depths of clinical depression, and we did not allow for individuals who were going through such times to receive such diagnoses. And this led a lot of people in the public to believe that mental health professionals were kind of these heartless people, simply because typically you need some kind of diagnosis to be able to apply for insurance coverage. So this is really a big change that's been made now, such that bereavement is actually allowed in terms of something that brought on the onset of these signs and symptoms that we classically associate with depression. But of course, with that comes the likelihood that there will be a climbing rate of individuals with that diagnosis.
Wow.
And so what does stress and exhaustion, can that long periods of stress, exhaustion, people working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, 3 jobs just to get by, can that stress and exhaustion somehow serve as a trigger point that could push you into a mild depression, a heavier depression?
Our understanding of many mental illnesses now follows a model that in the medical community we refer to as the diathetic stress model, which is just a very fancy way of saying that our genes, our biological predisposition to developing a mental illness, and oftentimes these are dispositions that are heritable, meaning that it can be transmitted along your family line, almost like high blood pressure. And what happens is that having those genes, that predisposition, is almost like having a light switch that can be off for your entire life. It doesn't have to turn on. But then you also need some significant life stressor. It could be something like having to work multiple jobs to make ends meet. It could be losing your money in the stock market, the death of a loved one or a close friend. There has to be some significant life stressor that serves to almost turn that light switch on, if you will. And once that switch is on, this is when you begin to see the manifestation of these signs and symptoms that we associate with mood disorders like depression.
All right, so that explains for people that are going through maybe financial issues. What we found out now that Robin Williams was diagnosed with Parkinson's, but one thing that is a question of mine, there's many people that are not suffering from Parkinson's as a celebrity, and they're very successful, and they're A-list celebrity. So why would somebody at that stage in their life and seem to have everything still go through this bipolar or stresses to cause severe depression?
Sure. This is really the question I think that's on so many people's minds. A lot of us, particularly here in the States, we see celebrities, we put celebrities on a pedestal that almost makes them not necessarily superhuman, but we look at them and say, these guys have everything. They have money, they have fame. In the case of Mr. Williams, I mean, just over the past 72 hours, the tremendous outpouring of love and support. This was a very loved man.
Right.
And a lot of people just can't understand, how in the world could someone with these things that many of us would say we all want, how could someone like this go through this? And I think that this really serves to point out in a very important way 2 things. Number one is the humanity of mental illness, that at the end of the day, even someone that we put on such a high pedestal is still vulnerable to mental illness. And the second is that when it comes to mental illness, many people have a misunderstanding, particularly of something like depression, because the word depression is just part of our lingo. We have a bad day at work, there's a breakup, we come home, we say, God, I'm so depressed right now. But clinical depression is a biological disorder that's just as biological as heart disease or as cancer. And at the end of the day, it's not something that someone can just snap out of or kind of, buck up and just get through it. This is a very serious illness. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, this kind of misunderstanding that it's either a choice or a character flaw or a sign of weakness to have this diagnosis oftentimes leaves people struggling when they should actually go and actually seek mental health counseling, which would make the situation hopefully better, or at least increase the likelihood of getting better.
And do you know, with I heard that when you get diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, that it does increase, of course, the stress, but I don't know if you know much about the Parkinson's itself. Should that have made him take his own life, as in because of the severe depression that he's going through, or did you read up on that at all?
There's two factors at play here. One of them is just the very understandable, I think, and I think all of us can kind of relate to this. Having a diagnosis like Parkinson's disease is basically something, it's a major life stressor, and it's also something where, let's keep in mind that he just went through a major heart surgery recently. Right. It's something where you just can't do some of the things that maybe you love to do. He was a wrestler when he was in school, is a very active guy, is traveling overseas. All of a sudden, people telling you, hey, buddy, you got to slow down. Maybe you can't do some of those things that you used to really enjoy. That can be a very frustrating dilemma that can increase stress. That's number one. Number two is that when we're talking about Parkinson's disease, how it works neurologically is that there's a lack of a chemical it's called dopamine. It's a little molecule in the brain that does a number of things, but one of them is that it helps you to move fluidly. So this is why if we see a celebrity who's been courageously kind of out when it comes to his Parkinson's, someone like Michael J. Fox or Muhammad Ali, you see kind of these tremors, these quakes that occur in your body. And what happens here is that a lot of people don't know that the exact opposite situation, so instead of having too much dopamine, having too little, this is how schizophrenia works. Wow. So what happens is that you typically take, when it comes to something like Parkinson's, a kind of pill where what ends up happening is that it gives you more dopamine in your brain. It mimics that process. And because of that, you're able to move more fluidly. But what people usually don't realize is that one kind of antidepressant, it's called a tricyclic depressant. It's still a class of medication that's used quite commonly. But one of the things that it does is that it increases the amount of dopamine as well as another little molecule called serotonin in your brain. And so probably something that could have played a role here in terms of maybe exacerbating the depression. It's so hard to know, and thank goodness they're doing a toxicology report and so on and so forth on Mr. Williams to be able to give us a better clinical sense of what was going on in an autopsy. But what happens is that if you already don't have enough dopamine or serotonin in your brain at the time to be able to overcome these symptoms of your mood disorder, and then you have something like Parkinson's compounding the lack of dopamine, this could be a potential explanation as to why it may have been more difficult to be able to recover.
So go ahead.
No, I'm just listening. I'm curious, slightly off the beaten path. Dr. Singh, what got you passionate about going into this field? You're obviously very articulate and you're amazingly passionate about it. So what was it that made you want to go into this field of expertise and help so many people that are, quite frankly, misunderstood?
Right.
Absolutely. There was a number of things that kind of contributed to my personal interest. I remember when I was growing up, there was a movie. It was a Nickelodeon movie called Harriet the Spy was the name of this movie. And there was a child psychologist in this movie. And he was just one of the kindest, most compassionate people that I had seen portrayed on the silver screen. And I strictly remember leaning over to my mother and saying, Mom, that's a job? And her saying, oh, yeah, be quiet, but that's a child psychologist. I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And the reasons, of course, change over the years, but I think it just goes to show that at the end of the day, certain portrayals of mental health professionals, like Robin Williams in Awakenings, Good Will Hunting, the list goes on, really. Patch Adams,
That's right.
showing people in these professions in a way that was kind and loving and empathic. I can't imagine how many people that influenced. I remember the first time I watched Good Will Hunting and thought at the end of the day, my God, if I could have that kind of an impact on just one person. There's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, to know that one life has breathed easier because you have lived, this is the definition of success. And certainly, I think Mr. Williams made so many of our lives better, easier, more enjoyable that he certainly met that goal.
Well, and like in Patch Adams, Good Will Hunting, and Awakenings, each of those healthcare professionals had to often fight the system on behalf of their patients. Do you find yourself sort of in that struggle too, to get new information now, or to buck the system a little bit so that you can continue helping people in the fashion that you're helping them?
I would say a major challenge right now, which is one that is understandable given the economic climate that we're in, is getting enough federal funding to be able to do the behavioral research that we do on mental illness. There are some absolutely phenomenal funding agencies out there, everything from the National Science Foundation to the American Psychological Association, so the more private organizations that traditionally have really funded a dramatic amount of research and have really helped to push the field forward. And I know that many of us have been affected by certain shortages when it comes to federal funding for these programs. So I think that's a real challenge that we face right now. And just like with anything, sometimes not having the financial means to be able to support the kind of work that we would love to do means getting quite creative in terms of the solutions that we can come up with. So I think that is really the major challenge that I have found myself facing over the past several years.
Now, when people are going through bipolar and suicide, what is there something that's, or signs or something that people can step in and do? Because I know, like Robin Williams, I'm sure he's had to say this verbally at one time, that I don't want to be here, or maybe in rehab, or maybe to his wife. When somebody is saying this to their partner or to their friend, or even nowadays on social media.
Sure.
Even yesterday, my nephew, and I'm not going to say which one, but my nephew is like, I wish I could die. I took that very seriously because nowadays, you never know what people are really going through. So what can people do, and what are some of the signs that we can look out for when this is going on?
Sure. This is such a tough topic because, number one, it's so incredibly compassionate. People who, like yourself, we hear people in pain and we want to be proactive. We want to get in there. We want to make things better. This is a very human impulse, particularly when we're dealing with people that we really love and care about. And when people say either they don't want to live, or that, they wish that they could just go to sleep and not wake up, this is just, it pains us personally. And oftentimes this is a sign of communication in terms of trying to say, this is how badly I hurt. It's almost as if you want to get some sense across. So the individuals who speak like this want to get a sense across of just the magnitude of how bad they feel. They wish that they could make the pain go away. Speaking to people with depression, oftentimes I have people who say, I say it all the time. I say that I want to hurt myself or kill myself, but I would never do it. And when you ask kind of, okay, well, maybe you can give me, shed some more light on this for me, they usually say something that I personally randomly call it Rip Van Winkling. That they wish that they could go to bed or somehow pass out and wake up when the situation is better. To have to live through the lowest of lows, I think, is the big challenge. And the important thing to know about predicting suicide is this is really one of the most difficult and extreme behaviors to predict, solely because we call it a base rate. It just refers to how often something occurs. It's quite low. So on the one hand, it's true that suicide now has surpassed, in terms of the number of mortalities each year in the United States, it has surpassed the number of deaths by car crashes, by car accidents.
That is
to give
so
you kind
sad.
of kind of a frame of reference there. But at the same time, we're talking about something that claims the lives of 0.0001% of Americans each year. So because of its infrequency, it can often be extremely difficult to statistically identify predictors, reliable predictors of suicide. But the ones that we do know when it comes to individuals diagnosed with bipolar disorder, three of the big ones are number one is being white. Number two is being recently widowed or being widowed. So that's one. Another one has to do with age. And this is one that a lot of people don't know about because there's been a dramatic and significant shift just over the past several years. Before, in terms of the number of people attempting suicide, we saw that the highest risk group were kind of late adolescents, early adults. But now this has shifted to kind of younger baby boomers. So between the ages of 45 to 64.
Wow.
So, and of course, Mr. Williams was 63. So really the pattern there in terms of age is quite consistent with the national rates of suicide that we've been seeing.
That is very, I never heard of that, and that's very fascinating. It really is.
And why do you think it is? And I know everybody's mind thinks differently. I'm a firm believer that no two people think or feel the same thing about any subject on the earth plane or throughout the universe for that matter. And so whenever it comes to, I'm assuming, diagnosing certain mental illnesses, it's literally, I would think you can't, and I'm not saying you're doing this, Dr. Singh, I would assume that you cannot blanket everyone that's bipolar with the same med. You can't just assume that this one med's going to help this 10 million people that are all bipolar. It almost has to be an individual, almost contoured pharmaceutical cocktail per person based on their biology, right?
Certainly. This is one of the challenges that we really face on the day-to-day, because at the end of the day, we have statistical information. So we have research studies, clinical trials that suggest that that certain classes of drugs, so something like lithium, antidepressants, anticonvulsants, not electroshock therapy, but we call it electroconvulsive therapy, that these things really are quite successful in terms of treating signs and symptoms of bipolar disorder. At the end of the day, though, you're completely right that this is something where we need to take clinical judgment into consideration. The funny thing is that there's over 70 years of research now suggesting that when it comes to clinical judgment as opposed to kind of statistical judgment, that human judgment entering into the clinical decision-making process significantly weakens our ability to predict behaviors like suicide. But at the same time, it's nearly impossible to be ethical and at the same time ignore certain signs that are individualistic. So to give you an example, it's one of my favorite examples, has to do with self-harm and also violence towards others. I have a good friend of mine. He lives in London, and he works in what's called a medium secure unit, psychiatric facility for individuals at risk of harming themselves or others. And he told me one day, he said, Jay, I have a case I want to talk to you about. He's like, it's very frustrating. So I said, okay, why is it frustrating? And he said, I have this middle-aged woman who is the loveliest woman you will ever meet, except when she wears a red cardigan. And whenever she wears this red cardigan, she's assaulted staff. She tried to stab me with the pen. And it's just very frustrating. And I said, well, what? The first thought was, why don't you just take the cardigan away? Is this something that we can take away? And he just told me, he's like, Jay, that's the problem. We took the cardigan away, and then she kept doing it, but we had no idea when she was going to do it. So in the end, they had to give her the cardigan back so that they had kind of a sign of when this was going to happen. And of course, if you think about this, it's so individualistic, this sign, this predictor, that no group-based statistical model would ever be able to pick up on it. It was something that was idiosyncratic to this patient. And so it's so hard to simultaneously rely on something like clinical studies that are based on groups, but then also having to make decisions that are based at the level of the individual and therefore are perhaps most likely to effectively assist this individual in terms of mitigating the risk of self-harm or suicide.
Wow. And if you're just tuning in, you're listening to On Air with Tony Sweet. I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Tony Sweet.
And we are talking with Professor J.P. Singh. And I have a quick question for you. in today's medical field, most patients feel like they are absolutely not getting good bedside manner from their doctors.
Sure.
And sometimes even their nurses. In the field of mental illness, it almost seems to me that if you're a doctor that doesn't have good bedside manner, you're literally doing a huge disservice to the study of mental illness as well as your patients. Would you agree with that?
75% of the likelihood of treatment, of psychotherapy succeeding, is based on your relationship with your therapist.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, this is something where, and there was a bunch of studies done decades ago by a gentleman, now very prolific, famous guy. Unfortunately, he's passed away, named Carl Rogers. And what Carl Rogers said was, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not convinced that having some advanced degree makes you a good therapist. So what he did was a series of studies where he just literally found people on the street and had them almost play out, being a therapist, just listening to someone else, versus psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. And what he found was that the essential element of being a good therapist is being empathic, being compassionate, and genuinely caring about the wellness of the people who you're serving, of your patients. So in the end, it's absolutely critical that your therapist is seen and that they see you as a teammate. This is really what we call a therapeutic alliance between the patient and the therapist. So I would say that it's absolutely critical to have a good bedside manner. A lot of people feel, bedside manner, this is something if I don't naturally have, then I need to be trained in it. Maybe it's just not naturally me. But simply that care of course, the caring professions is such an essential element in terms of really maximizing that likelihood that you're going to be able to assist your patient in terms of recovering, if not physically, then psychologically.
Well, and I'll tell you something, Dr. Singh, they're calling that therapeutic alignment, but Tony and I know just from listening to you that you call that common sense.
Right.
You would be surprised. I typically call these things uncommon common sense.
I want to switch it a little bit because we talk a lot about the patients or the people that are dealing with directly with
Sure.
bipolar and addictions. Now, the people that are family members, my mother went through shock treatments in the late 80s because she was not bipolar, but she had severe depression. So I've heard a lot of people, as you saw TV host and radio host say, Robin Williams was a coward. Robin Williams, the easy way out. How can we educate the people that are seeing this happen, the family members that don't understand? Well, how can we educate those people to be a little more empath,
compassionate.
Sure.
compassionate to the actual patient or the people going through it?
Great question.
Sure. I think that, again, everything apparently has a two-part answer. So part one of this, I think, is, or I just like counting. That's possible. So the first thing that I would say here is that at the end of the day, it's critical that we get the word out that when it comes to something like clinical depression, that there's a difference between the emotion of depression and the disorder of depression.
Right.
All of us, part of the normal human experience is feeling down some days. You get broken up within a relationship. You lost your dog. We all get these feelings of being down, of having the blues. And this is quite different, feeling the natural lows of life, to clinical depression, in which literally one of the symptoms that's characteristic of the disorder is losing all interest and the capability of enjoying any leisure or recreation activities that you used to really love. So, for example, a lot of family members have told me, we're really frustrated with, our nephew, our son, my spouse, very frustrated with, because, maybe their favorite thing was bowling. And I keep taking him bowling because he used to love it. And now he just hates it. And I'm getting really frustrated. But at the end of the day, this is something where this is characteristic of the disorder. It's very hard for loved ones to see someone they care so much about kind of almost collapse into this depression and not be able to kind of proactively do anything about it. And really the most proactive thing, the best thing you can do is, number one, be there for your loved one, no question. And being there doesn't necessarily mean being proactive. Sometimes it means, you know what, maybe they like a television show on Netflix. They like House of Cards. Well, sit down and just watch House of Cards with them. Be in the same space as that individual. We call this joint attentional processing. Just be in the same space. You don't need to have a conversation about depression. Simply being there physically and emotionally is enough. If they want to talk, they'll talk. If not, don't pressure them. That's number one. Number two, I think, is really getting the word out that one of the things that a lot of people, it's very natural to do, but may actually be counterproductive, is trying to kind of chronically check in on your loved ones, who, for example, if I were to tell you the statistical fact that individuals diagnosed with bipolar disorder are twice as likely to commit suicide as those of us who are not diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and then I hung up the phone right now, I can guarantee you that we would have listeners left and right crowding the phone lines, calling up their loved ones, because this is a disorder that affects 3 in 100 Americans. So it's quite prevalent. Wow. People saying, oh my goodness, is my friend, my loved one, are they going to hurt themselves? How do you feel? Promise me that you would always call me before, you do anything serious. And the issue is that when it comes to mental illness, because there is still this stigma out there, that oftentimes you can feel quite victimized. You can feel like someone who's stigmatized, like someone who's kind of been picked out of the crowd. And that's always an uncomfortable situation for people. And so at the end of the day, by kind of focusing on that person's signs and symptoms, it almost is like defining your loved one by that problem. And so in the end, focusing on that one thing can almost exacerbate the problem and exacerbate the stress and frustration that people with these clinical diagnoses are already experiencing.
So don't identify them as a label or a title. Go in and use that uncommon common sense you're teaching us about and be present with them, see them, hear them, and allow them to be, just simply be there in the best way you can be.
I think we lost him there for a second.
Oh, no.
I know. We're going to get him back on right now.
Hi there. Sorry, I just lost you there for a moment.
Actually, it's good. No, you sound great. Eddie, go ahead and re-say what you said.
And so we're just jumping back to what you were saying earlier about uncommon common sense. Don't identify the people that you love who have mental illness as a label or as a title of bipolar or this. Literally be present for them, almost like from I call it your heart, mind, and your gut, brain. You can be present with someone and not have to say a word.
Absolutely. I completely agree, yes.
In fact, I'm going to use my mother as an example because, when she was going through her bout, she would say, of course, I was a teenager and I really didn't know what was going on, but, she just said, no, could you just sit in the room with me? She didn't want to say anything. She didn't want to do anything. She just wanted somebody, like we just watched television together, and that really just made a huge difference to her to have somebody there. Yeah. So it does make a difference. Well, before we get out of here, because we have just a few more minutes, and I have to first say that, people that's just turning in, this is Professor J.P. Singh. He is the CEO of the Global Institute of Forensic Research. Before we get out here, what is the Global Institute of Forensic Research?
Absolutely. So actually, I just moved back to the United States. I grew up here, but I moved back from Switzerland where I was working for the Department of Justice. Oh, and wow. the reason why I moved back was because I realized that here in the States as well as internationally, I've worked in over 5 countries, and the one thing that I see consistent across the countries is that there is a very slow trickle down from when new research comes out to when it gets integrated into the practices of clinicians across the country, be they working for the government, private practice, etc. And at the end of the day, really no one's immune from this. I gave a talk for the military a few weeks ago and was mentioning some new approaches that literally just came out in December of last year. And they were, so excited to be learning about these. And, we're asking, where can we get these papers? We had no idea. And this is why, for me, it's so incredibly important to, as rapidly as possible, get best practice research into best practice in clinicians' homes or wherever their offices are. So this is what what we call a GIFER, so the Global Institute of Forensic Research does, is that we focus on these interpersonal outcomes. For example, violence towards others, homicide, violence towards the self, so self-harm and suicide, trying to make sure that any research about how to predict these events or how to intervene in these events gets out there to the public as quickly as possible. And we definitely welcome you to visit us. Our website is www.gifrinc.com.
Now, are you do you see patients yourself, or do you do more just research?
Sure. So I am the John Madden, I like to say, of the literature, insofar as my role is as a consultant. My role is basically as the voice and of so many grieving families, and also the voice of clinicians or statisticians, researchers, to be able to say, listen, these are such common problems, but it's so essential that people have a basic understanding of what's going on. And I do a great deal of consultancy. So if anyone's interested in hiring me for consultancy, I certainly do play in that role very frequently.
Awesome. So you're a liaison between these worlds, and you're bringing this information to the everyday person in a vernacular that we can actually understand it, which I appreciate, because I don't understand all the sophisticated terminology people talk about.
I'm a country boy from Kansas, so I know I don't.
Exactly. And you have such heart and compassion whenever you're speaking about this, Dr. Singh. And I tell you, the other thing we love about you, too, is you genuinely care.
Yeah,
we can feel
tell
that you care, and that makes a difference. And that's how I feel like patients are able to be seen and heard. And I was going to ask you about our men and women in the military and how you're able to be a channel for that group of people that, quite frankly, has been kind of just had the door slammed on them by our own government.
Has for years.
For years, yes. So thank you. We appreciate you for that.
I would say if there's a population of the United States that really just deserves the best we have to offer, it's our men and women in the armed services.
Right.
They have protected us, defended us, and it would be tragic if they, when returning to the States with, psychological problems that they encountered while abroad or even while serving here in the States, to not get them the help that they so rightfully deserve. The one thing that I've actually been very pleased to hear about is that in the interviews that I've done over the past several days, is that we've had a lot of callers call in to some of these talk shows, and a number of them have been veterans. And we've asked them the same thing about the VA, saying, hey, can you give us a sense of the state of mental health care when it comes to the VA? And there's been a consistent reporting that, particularly over the past 10 years, that the quality of mental health services has really improved, in the perceptions at least, of our nation's vets. Is it perfect? I'm sure it's not. No mental health service is ever perfect. But it's certainly something where I think also us having a much more fundamental understanding of certain quite common issues, certain things, for example, like PTSD or chronic anxiety or behavioral issues. For example, over a third of veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan have within the past year self-reported via surveys that they've engaged in violent incidents, 10% extremely severely violent incidents. A number of these are problems with domestic violence, which is a big issue, or feelings of wanting to self-harm or commit suicide. So it's absolutely critical that we continue to fund research into these areas, and then to get these pieces of research into practice for our servicemen and women, as well as for just people who are out there in the community who genuinely need and deserve this care.
Awesome. And will you give your website address out again, please?
Absolutely. The website address is www.gifrinc.com, and you can contact me directly via Twitter, which is JAYPSINGH
Well, Dr. Jay Singh, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Oh, there they go again.
So kind.
We really would hope to have you come back. We have, I'm sure we have so much more to talk about, and areas if you're ever willing to make the trek through Skype again.
Yeah. It would be my pleasure.
Yeah, and if you're in the Los Angeles area, we'd love to have you here in person, because you're very passionate and we appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really really appreciate that. I would love to do that with you guys sometime.
Perfect. Well, anybody that wants to catch this show again, it's going to be up on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, and pretty much anywhere else so that we will place this. So in case you want to go back and reference this, Dr. J. Singh, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon, all right?
Thanks,
It's my pleasure. Have a great day, guys.
All right, you too.
too.
Take care. All right, it's time to take a break, and when we come back, we have our next guest coming in. We're going to go from talking about a very serious subject to have a little fun, have a little music, and that's what I think is one of the biggest therapies for me in life is music, and I think it's time that we play some great, amazing music. And then we're going to have two people in studio, Ish and PM Romeo. You might know them better as William Pilgrim. So don't go anywhere. On air with Tony Sweet on UBN Radio.